Welcome to the DRF Sports Betting Podcast, brought to you by DRF Sports. America's most trusted name in horse racing is now providing sports bettors with exclusive data, analytics, previews, videos, and expert picks on all major sports. Bet smarter and have more fun doing it. It's the DRF Sports Betting Podcast, and now your host, Sheldon Alexander. Ready, set, bet.
This is the first episode of the DRF Sports Betting Podcast. I'm your host, Sheldon Alexander, and I'm fired up to be here for this brand new project for DRF Sports. If you're not familiar with us, well, where have you been? Daily Racing Forum has been around for literally over 100 years, giving you all the information, data, and analysis for your horse racing needs. But now, they're making moves. Check out the website drf.com/sports for all your football betting needs. And right now, they've got the division previews up, including how to bet the Chiefs as a clear favorites in the AFC West. That and more again at drf.com/sports, or follow along on Instagram at DRF Sports and on Twitter, DRF_sports for the latest football betting news. And of course, for everything else that's going on at DRF Sports, including this podcast, which again, the DRF Sports Betting Podcast, where I'll be with you twice a week for everything you need to know, the ins and outs of betting on the NFL, which is back. And including today's show, we're talking futures, conference picks, MVP picks, coach of the year. I can go on and on and on, but bottom line is we got you covered with everything you need to know, trying to find you some value on how to bet the upcoming NFL season. But of course, as I set sail on this new project, I had to reach out to an old friend to be the first guest on the pod. And if you like sports betting like me, you like the numbers, digging deep dive, trying to find some value, then Matt Russell is your guy. And he joins us on the pod right now. And we are so close to the start of the NFL season, which for me means it's time to start making some bets. I love football and I love betting on football, but like most people, I need some help from time to time. And so there's no one else that I would turn to on the first episode of this, the DRF Sports Betting Podcast, and Matt Russell from The Score. Mr. Russell, how you doing?
Man, I am fantastic. Any day now, right? Like we're kicking this ball off here, depending on when you're listening to this. Maybe they've already kicked the ball off for Thursday night. Hopefully not, because we're going to get into that game a little later on. But look at us, man. We made it. I guess we named that football pod after all. That's a wink, wink to some of our listeners from back in the day.
Well played. I see what you did there. I see what you did. Well, as mentioned, right now at drf.com/sports, you can find full AFC West breakdowns. And this is why they're talking about the Chiefs as a clear-cut favorites yet again. Now, of course, we're always trying to find different angles, different ways to make some money. Betting the Chiefs, tough to argue against that. But do you have any other angles on the AFC West?
Yeah, I mean, listen, to sit here and say, hey, the Chiefs are going to get beat this year. The Chiefs aren't going to win the division. They've won it, a billion years in a row, I think. You'd have to check me on that math. Here's the thing, right? When we're looking to beat the team, whether it's division, conference, whatever, you're looking for uncertainty, but in a good way. And for me here, I'm looking at the Chargers, who are plus 500, plus 600 in some spots. Listen, I'm not going nuts with this because who wants to fade Patrick Mahomes over in any length of time? But this is a Chargers team who we don't really know what we're going to get offensively. We didn't see Justin Herbert at all in the preseason, but I think we like what Justin Herbert did last year. And that was when he was handicapped by his offensive coordinator, Shane Steichen, and of course, your boy, Anthony Lynn, who is just an absolute disaster. Now, you talk about improvements from a coaching standpoint, like, what's the number, right? Like, what is the number that we can put on this? Are they 10% better? Are they 20% more improved from an actual winning game standpoint, and seeing how all of the things that they did last year to lose games, once you even just remove that, let alone actual good decision-making that might come into play here under Brandon Staley and his coaching staff, what's the number, right? Like, they might be the next really great team, right? And so the Chiefs were once this team that we didn't know, right? Patrick Mahomes in his first year, he had overthrown Alex Smith, and it was like, And we've seen him play one game. It was like a week 17 game. We don't really know what to expect from the Chiefs. And then all of a sudden, boom, MVP type season. I'm not saying Justin Herbert's necessarily going to have an MVP type season, but when we're looking for that next team who is going to be really, really good for the next 5 years, the way the Chiefs are right in the middle of right now, might be the Chargers, right? Really sharp, seemingly, head coach and a lot of pieces, a lot of talent that had been, brought down a little bit over the last couple of years. I think it's worth a flyer on the Chargers. I'm not saying anybody's going to get hurt on the Chiefs or anything like that, but the Chargers always match up well with the Chiefs. I mean, look at it from a defensive standpoint. Like Patrick Mahomes' numbers have always just kind of dipped when playing the Chargers. Now, again, Staley, different defense, but just as sharp of a guy as, Gus Bradley was when the Chargers were employing him to be the defensive coordinator. So, when we're talking about just those matchups, maybe they get a split this year. And then it kind of doesn't really matter how good the Chiefs are. Yeah, obviously they're going to win a bunch of games against a bunch of other teams. But if the Chargers do the same thing, right, they're going to be in contention for this division. So I think the ceiling here is really high on the Chargers.
Yeah, and I mean, just having the new coach angle. You mentioned no Anthony Lynn. That's got to be worth at least a couple wins, no?
Yeah, we worked so hard
paying attention last year.
We worked so hard coming up with ratings, right? I've got all my ratings for these teams and this time, whatever. I'm like, I don't know how high to make the Chargers, right? They could be really high by 3-4 weeks into the season. I'd rather be on the front end of that than sort of lagging behind and going like, can you believe how good this team is?
I totally agree with you there on the AFC West, but also up on drf.com/sports right now is an AFC South breakdown where the talk there is about the Titans being the clear-cut favorites. Now, of course, make sure you check that out. But Matt, I have to ask you, what do you make of the AFC South?
This is the exact opposite, right, than the AFC West. This has dumpster fire division written all over, right? There's always got to be one. I think we always kind of assume, especially the last couple of years, that it's going to be the NFC East. Who knows? Maybe the Cowboys end up being good. Maybe Washington ends up being good. In this case here, I think Tennessee is going to take a step back, right? Obviously, everybody's talked all summer long about Arthur Smith leaving and all of that sort of thing. I think they take a little bit of a step back here. And I think for me, though, in this division, obviously Houston, speaking of dumpster fires, right? Like that's like a whole dump fire, right? That's the whole thing is up in flames. They've got no shot. I'm looking to, instead of, back Tennessee or back this team, I'm looking to fade the Colts here, right? Like this does not feel good if you're the Colts, right? Carson Wentz, we can go back and forth on whether we think he is going to have this bounce back here. I don't necessarily think that's the case, right? You're requiring him to not only be healthy, but also be good. And those are two things that I don't necessarily believe Carson Wentz can be. So, we've also seen a couple of other injuries, right? T.Y. Hilton's out, to start the season. Bunch of stuff going wrong with the Colts. So how do we take advantage of that, right? So it's easy to just be like, well, under on their regular season win total. Well, I think the market's kind of caught up on the idea that the Colts might not be very good here. But since we're talking about the division, what I'm looking to do is I'm looking to grab the two other teams. One of them, obviously, Tennessee, and the other being Jacksonville. And you're saying like Jacksonville, like, what are you talking about? Well, let me ask you this. Sheldon, when was the last time you did the limbo?
Never.
Yeah, good. That's the correct answer. No one should ever do the limbo under any circumstance. But we all can picture it. We all know what it is, right? You throw the bar up and you do the little dance and you go underneath it, right? And sometimes, most of the time, you fall flat on your butt. Now, here's the situation. We just talked about the Chargers and the Chiefs. The bar, really, really high, right? Or in this case, low, right? You have to really accomplish something to knock off the Chiefs. I don't think you have to accomplish that much this year in the AFC South. I think 9-8 may very well win it here. And so, I don't think necessarily that Jacksonville is going to do that, but we're looking at 10-1 right now in the division for the Jacksonville Jaguars, right? And again, a lot of uncertainty. Trevor Lawrence finally had a good preseason game. Urban Meyer, who knows what that guy's up to, right? So we don't really know what to expect from Jacksonville. So I'd take a little and I'd put that on the Jacksonville Jaguars. The reason being is they have a pretty comfy schedule to start the year, right? They have the Houston Texans to start. There's a Bengals game. I believe it's week 3 or week 4. And then they have a home game against Tennessee. Meanwhile, Tennessee, trickier schedule to start the season. Obviously a tough game in week 1. If we can get to a point here where maybe Tennessee's 2-2, maybe Jacksonville's 2-2, maybe Jacksonville gets that home win in week 5. Now, all of a sudden, instead of paying minus, 130, minus 140, something along those lines for the Titans, now we're talking about an even money, maybe a plus 130, something along those lines, while we already have Jacksonville at 10-1, maybe even 11-1, depending on what, the book you're using. And we've got that in our back pocket. So we've got plus money on either side. Now, how do we lose that bet? Well, the Colts win the division, right? But I don't think that's going to happen. So I think we can sort of play this sort of stock market-y style here and buy a little low early on with Jacksonville, think that they might get a couple wins here early heading into that game against Tennessee. And then we're going to wait. And then we're going to buy low on Tennessee. Once that price gets a little more palatable in the, plus 120 type of a range, right? And, by the way, the Colts might be okay to start the season, but are they going to stay that way throughout the year? I don't think so. So I think that's our opportunity in the AFC South.
I like that, man. And I really love when we have these conversations because you're giving me value and different ways to look at something that seems super simple in terms of, let's just pick this team or just pick that team. But no, fade one team, go at it in another way, see where you can seek the value there. And is there an opportunity to do that in maybe some of the other divisions? I mean, I look around and Aaron Rodgers he's made things a little interesting in Green Bay. I'll say that. So when you look at the rest of that division, how do you see that playing out?
Yeah. So I have a couple of different plays here. I mean, for one, I like the Vikings to win this division. I know a lot of people don't necessarily like that. That makes me like it even more, to be completely honest with you, right? It's easy to be like, yeah, Packers are going to do this, blah, 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 right? But for the last 2 years, it's been on Aaron Rodgers' shoulders, right? And if Aaron Rodgers listen, he's fantastic. He's got one Super Bowl in his entire career, right? Eventually he loses. Not every year do they make the playoffs. Not every year do they win the division, right? We've seen the Chicago Bears win the division relatively recently. We have seen the Vikings win the division relatively recently. The only thing we know for sure is that the Detroit Lions are not going to win the division. So to me, it's like, okay, we're getting plus 275 here with the Vikings. When I watched that, the last game that they played against each other in the regular season last year, Dalvin Cook running all over the Packers. And so it's not a full-blown fade of the Packers in the same way that is the Colts. It's more just like everything is overpriced right now for the Packers. And if they're not going to do it defensively, and it's going to be all on the shoulders of Aaron Rodgers, that offensive line's changed quite a bit. Right. And we talked about the Chargers here a little earlier. Nobody's talking about Corey Linsley, the center that moved from the Packers to the Chargers. I think that's a really big deal. And now you've seen last week was David Bakhtiari. He's not going to start the season healthy for the Packers as well. It's a lot of moving pieces on the offensive line. Right. And so you can only throw swing passes to Devontae Adams and let him, break some tackles, to get a bunch of yards the way that they do. You only do that so many times. Same thing with Aaron Jones before teams figure it out. Right. Mm-hmm. And, we'll talk a little bit more about Mike Zimmer here in a little bit, but, I think this is a team that, it was rough last year. It was really rough last year for the Vikings. And that's a team that has a home field advantage more so than most teams. And they were coming out on the field, looking around, waiting and seeing and not seeing anybody. And that had to be a disadvantage in a lot of ways for the Vikings. So between health on defense, more experience on defense and a defensive coach, I think they've got a chance at plus 275 in most places to win that division. Elsewhere, I want to talk a little bit here about the NFC South being kind of a combination of the AFC West and the AFC South as well. So the NFC South, we're sitting there and it's like Tampa Bay, all right? Tampa Bay is to win, et cetera, et cetera. I don't believe that much in the Falcons. The Saints, it's going to be a dicey year, right? Anytime you have Jameis Winston as your quarterback, you're going to get some really good highs. You're going to get some really low lows. Carolina Panthers right now, 11-1 to win that division. Like, that's low-key sneaky. I'm not saying something's going to happen to Tom Brady here, but it's not obviously out of the question. Tampa Bay is going to win that division. I'm not saying that they're not, but when we're talking about like the Jacksonvilles of the world, where it's like a 10-1 shot with a division that has one good team that something has to happen to for it to sort of fall apart, that might be one that if you want to get a little sneaky, that might be the play I would make.
Okay. There's a division that I'm not gonna lie to you here. I'm gonna be very honest. A division that I personally am very interested in because it involves my San Francisco 49ers, but also there's a lot of buzz about this being the best division in football. That's the NFC West. What do you make about what's going on out there with three teams that people wouldn't be surprised if three teams made the playoffs?
Well, isn't that the thing, right? I would throw a fourth team, right? Like, whether it's Arizona is the long shot, right? And the reason I wouldn't bet Arizona to win the division is because there are that three-headed monster that sort of run the division over the last little while, right? And that's when we're talking about the bar, right? So the bar is going to be set really high. We just don't really know which team is going to set it, right? AFC West, we know Kansas City is going to set the bar really, really high. We don't know, but somebody is going to do it, right? These teams are going to beat each other up. So I don't want anything to do with this from a division standpoint. But here's the thing, and maybe this is bad news for you, pal. Uh-oh. I love the San Francisco 49ers, man. A healthy San Francisco 49ers team like Jimmy G, Trey Lance, you at quarterback, like it doesn't matter to me, man. Right? Like the system is the thing with San Francisco. Like you watch that run,
we trust.
Yeah, like I love watching the run game and just the quick passing, and whether again that's Jimmy G or Lance, I don't really care. I'm looking to shoot higher here with San Francisco. So instead of like a plus 174 to the division, because guess what? If they win that division, they're going to be really good, right? Like you have to be really good to win that division. So I'm looking at them for a bigger type of thing, an NFC championship market, for example, right? And so let me put this out right away here. And normally people be like, why not the Super Bowl? Why not bet them to win the Super Bowl? Let's be honest. All right. Think about how you live your life, how we all live our lives. You're going to make this bet, San Francisco to win the Super Bowl, and then they're going to get to the Super Bowl, and then you're going to have 2 weeks, and you're going to be sitting there going like, I got them, 13, 14 to 1. Like, what do? I got a hedge. They're going up against, Kansas City. Like they're underdogs. Like, I don't know what to do. Just make it easier on yourself. Just bet the NFC championship market. Yeah, it's less, right? It's half the odds, but you don't have to sweat the whole hedging situation. And for me, when it comes to a conference championship market, I need a team that I think can win the 1 seed, right? I need you to be getting a bye so that you're not even playing in a game. Because that, in a lot of ways, is the only thing that's going to make a conference or Super Bowl, betting market bet valuable is if you just skip a step, right? By having that bye in the first week. And so listen, the division's going to be tough, but if San Francisco is as good as I think they can be, we're talking about a team that could go 13-4, right? 14-3, something along those lines. And maybe they top Tampa Bay for that 1 seed, right? So if I like them in the NFC West, I kind of have to like them in the NFC entirely. So I would bet them at plus 550, anything better than that. I think that's a great bet for thinking that San Francisco is going to get back to where they were 2 years ago. As you know, last year, right? Just brutal on them from an injury standpoint. Hopefully they stay healthy, and hopefully they just get cooking. Again, both quarterbacks, one quarterback, I don't care. Like you said, in Shanahan, I trust. And I'm looking to trust him to do some big things here and potentially get back to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, and that's my thing too, right? Like if I'm going to be serious for a second here, obviously there are things where, I'm talking about my heart. But talking about with my brain, as you mentioned, they were so injured last season on offense, on defense. So many key players were out of the lineup. So for them to even just salvage 6 wins last year, which I'm pretty sure was the number, it's like, I don't even know how that was a thing. So you return a bunch of players. You don't know what that wild card is going to be like with Trey Lance at all, but it's just giving another toy for Shanahan to play with. And if you follow that team at all, he doesn't need much. If he just has a decent quarterback, meaning Jimmy Garoppolo or even Matt Ryan, like success happens with Shanahan. Like we've just seen that, right? Time and time again. But if we segue here, you like the Niners in the NFC. If we switch things to the AFC conference bets, what are we thinking on that side?
Man, it's loaded. It is loaded this year, right? Like you look at, we look at the NFC and you're like, okay, Tampa Bay, and then who? And that's how we land on San Francisco. Like you look at the betting market, the Dallas Cowboys are like 6th in the bet. And you're like, oh my God, like what's going on here? You go over to the AFC and it's a total, sweepstakes at this point. So we talked about the Chargers, right? And it's funny to me, I'm looking at the odds right now and it's like the Chargers and the Broncos have the same odds basically to do things this year. And I look at that and I go, listen, the Broncos might be okay this year, but the high end possibility isn't really there, right? And you can blame, whether it's Bridgewater, obviously to start here, whether Locke ends up getting in there. For me, again, right? Like the Broncos are going to stay at a level where like, if they were worse than like 6 wins, I'd be shocked. If they were better than 10 wins, I'd be shocked. Whereas the Chargers could be anywhere, right? Depending on what happens there. So I really like the Chargers. But the other one is, as again, I'm looking at these odds and I'm looking at them in tiers, right? And at the very bottom of where it sort of becomes, okay, this team has no chance, is the Pittsburgh Steelers. And, you know, this introduces, of course, the buy low, sell high concept, right? Which we, you know, anybody who knows anything about betting the NFL knows that buy low, sell high is like the absolute, phrase that has to be said every single episode of any podcast ever, right? Like it is the absolute phrase that pays, if you will. So we're looking at buy low, sell high on a weekly basis here. But when we get through the summer here, I'm looking at this and I'm going, okay, hang on a sec. We all beat up the Steelers towards the end of last year because they were this fraudulent undefeated team, right? And it's if they were like 10-1 or 9-2, they would never have gotten our attention, right? We wouldn't be looking at them going like, I don't believe in them. We would just be like, yeah, they're 9-2. That sounds about right, right? But it's almost like a bad thing that they went undefeated for as long as they did because they got people's attention. We start looking at Roethlisberger. He's throwing the ball 50 times a game for upwards of 4 yards at a time, right? Like it looked really kind of gross. They're not able to run the football. Then we get to the draft. And what do, right? Cardinal sin, can't do it. Draft a running back in the first round. Now, listen, I disagree with that, right? Like, cannot do it. But what's done is done, right? They have the guy in there. And so, I'd like to think they're going to run the ball more than like 5 times a game, which is kind of where it got towards the end of the season last year. And so, a little bit more two-dimensional offense, right? Going to help Ben Roethlisberger. He's got a ton of weapons. And look at the recent history of the league. Right? Tom Brady, we all thought he was done, right? He goes out at home in New England to Tennessee. It's like, okay, well, and then he goes to Tampa Bay and we're like, well, maybe, and boom, Super Bowl. Peyton Manning couldn't throw the ball further than 20 yards down the field. Boom, Super Bowl, right? Like this isn't a throwing competition. If this was just who can throw it further, right? Like there would be a lot of quarterbacks that have been booted out of the league. Jay Cutler would be multiple Super Bowl champion Jay Cutler.
I was thinking Jamarcus Russell.
Demarcus Russell down on one knee, right? Just firing in Super Bowl victories because he can throw the ball 70 yards. Right? It's not how it works. So he's got a ton of weapons there. And we know the Steelers defense is going to be good. They just always are, right? That's a sum of the parts type situation going on in Pittsburgh. And I'm not saying they're going to do it, but when I look at this and I go, they're 40-1. And there's a lot of teams above them, if you will, right? With shorter prices for the Super Bowl. Then I'm just going, I don't trust that team nearly as much, right? Now, again, they go out in the playoffs last year because they get just absolutely shell-shocked in the first quarter by the Browns. And maybe if Mike Tomlin doesn't punt in the fourth quarter, maybe they end up moving on to the next round and who knows what happens there. But maybe we feel a lot better about the Steelers, as we go into what might be Ben Roethlisberger's final season. But last year he was coming off elbow surgery. Like I'd like to think that's going to get stronger. Of course, we had to do the thing where Ben Roethlisberger comes in the best shape of his life, right? Year 15 of Ben Roethlisberger.
Never heard
dropping
that before.
50 pounds. Yeah, exactly. So we're looking buy low, sell high. Like I'm looking to buy low on the Steelers here a little bit. Small investment, 40-1 for the Super Bowl, in the 20s for the AFC. Again, would you be stunned if they won the division again? Because by the way, they won the division last year, right? Would you be stunned if that happened? I certainly wouldn't. So for me, that's a little bit interesting down the pipe.
I hear what you're saying with my guy Najee Harris, but I'm hoping he does all right and has a good season just because, I like that. I like that pick by the Steelers. I just think that's an interesting one. And Ben, I'll never be rooting for Ben, but,
Fair.
but
Right.
I do agree with you. I love this concept, man. I just love finding the value in somewhere where people might not be looking, because you're right. There's so many other teams that are higher profiled that will make you overlook the Steelers. But every year when you look up, they're in the mix.
Yeah, especially in that division.
So when you look up and you say in the mix at plus 4, what'd you say? Plus
4,000.
4,000. 40-1. That is incredible. So as we continue to try to search for more value plays, right? Another interesting market is always the best record or the worst record market.
Right.
Which one do you like the most? Which one always gets your interest?
Yeah, this is the like diabolical part of me here, right? Like this is the one where you have to apologize in advance, because we look at the best record in the league market. And it's like, we know, right? Tampa Bay, yep, makes sense. Kansas City, all of that sort of thing. And it's like, okay, we can bet the record, we can bet the Super Bowl. Like I said, we can bet the conferences, divisions, all of that sort of thing, right? That's figured out. The sneaky one to me is worst record. Like that's really fun because you're rooting for disaster. Again, a little bit mean, right? A little bit harsh in a lot of ways. But, obviously we all think Houston's going to stink, right? That's just the assumption. Every year we come in thinking one team is going to be absolutely terrible, and it's not necessarily the case. Sometimes that team wins 5 games, and it's not like they set the world on fire, but they still end up being a little bit better than most people think. And when we're looking at Houston, I go, well, that's again pretty sketchy division. They might be able to pull something out there. Tyrod Taylor, veteran quarterback, all of that sort of thing, right? And so I'm looking around for something else. I'm looking for a team that if one thing goes wrong, and again, hate to do it, but we're talking about injuries here, right?
Okay.
And so what do you do? What are the teams out there that are just kind of hanging by a thread, whether it's quarterback that if he gets hurt, oh God, what's going to happen next, right? Or something else kind of goes wrong to start the season. Maybe, there's some injuries that are piling up before the season even starts. So there's a couple. AFC, Indianapolis, right? We talked about fading Indianapolis, right? Again, what if Carson Wentz doesn't get himself fully healthy? Now, it looks like he's going to start in week 1. Right? We've got a lineup finally in the last week or so for that game against Seattle. But how long might he last, right? And then what happens if you're Indianapolis? And we've already seen some other issues from an injury standpoint. I'm looking at the Atlanta Falcons, right? That were 4th worst in the league last year, right? They picked 4th in the draft. And that was when they had a pretty healthy season, right? Like Matt Ryan was fine and they were still really bad. Have they turned the defense around in 1 year? I don't think so. Right? Can you tell me right now who the backup quarterback is in Atlanta? Right? We had a lot of Felipe Franks sightings in the preseason.
Can I be honest? I'm always going to guess Matt Schaub.
Yeah. It should, and it always should be, and it might be for all we know. But the point is like anybody who likes the Falcons this year is going, well, because they have Arthur Smith and they have Matt Ryan to run Arthur Smith's offense. But speaking of running, right? Arthur Smith doesn't have Derrick Henry. He's not walking through that door. Right. So if something, God forbid, happens to Matt Ryan, who, getting up in age and all of that sort of thing, what happens to the Falcons? Right. It's probably not great. Well, you know what their odds right now are for worst record? 40-1. You liked 40-1 for the Pittsburgh Steelers on the plus side. Why wouldn't you like this? Now, again, Matt Ryan doesn't have to get hurt because they were 4th worst in the league last year when he wasn't hurt. I'm just saying these are the types of things that could, go awry, right? Even if the Steelers lost Ben Roethlisberger, that happened a couple of years ago, right? Mm-hmm. And the defense carried them to like an 8-8 season. So when you look at some of these other teams in that pocket where you go, okay, if this guy gets hurt, it's actually not the worst thing that happens, right? Like Minnesota, if Kirk Cousins gets hurt, there's still a pretty good core around there, right? So I'm just looking through it and it's like, okay, Saints, Packers, like at least those teams have backup quarterbacks or stopgap guys and some infrastructure there, right? And so for me, the lowest, sort of the best price here for a team that things can go awry on are the Colts at 33-1 and the Falcons at 40-1, right? Washington football team, they're at 33-1, but Ryan Fitzpatrick gets hurt. Okay, they're in the same spot that they were last year from a quarterbacking standpoint, relying on their defense in a pretty dicey division where they're still probably at least the second best team in the division. So it's like, that's not going to be that big of a deal. Same thing with Denver, right? Teddy Bridgewater gets hurt. Like at least they have Drew Lock. I can't believe that's a sentence that I just said out loud. At least they have Drew Lock, but you see what I'm saying, right? Same thing with the Bears, couple of quarterbacks, et cetera, et cetera. So, that's that little pocket there at 33-1 and 40-1, where if one or two things go awry here, right, that could be a situation where they just go, yeah, you know what? And by the way, like both teams don't have quarterbacks of the future. Right. They'd love it in Indy if it was Carson Wentz. But if things went awry and all of a sudden that first overall pick was in their sights, Atlanta's down for that. Yep. Indy's down for that. You know how well that's gone over the last couple of decades, right? Getting Peyton Manning and Andrew Luck. Like they would be feeling that. So they can also have like reason to kind of, I don't want to use the T word here, but tank it down the stretch if things go awry.
I got you, my dude. And so much great information, especially when we're talking about the divisional futures and conference futures and all that fun stuff. But of course, remember, for more of the divisional future stuff, head to drf.com/sports. Got your breakdowns there for sure. And of course, we want to know what you also think too. While you're listening to this pod, whether you agree or disagree with anything we're saying here, let us know. Follow the accounts at DRF Sports on Instagram or on Twitter at DRF_sports. But we still got so much more to go over because this is such a fun time of the year. And when we're talking futures, the other side of this is award season. So let's start off with Coach of the Year, because there's a lot of things, a lot of different angles you could go with here in the NFL. And it's always tough because you can go with, whoever had the biggest turnaround. You can go with the fresh face, or you can go with the solid vet. Which way are you looking?
Yeah, to me, this is three different categories for Coach of the Year, right? So the first category is called the Bill Belichick category. And this is really complicated. Do we give it to Bill Belichick this year? Right? That's the category. Because this is the LeBron James MVP thing, right? This is the Michael Jordan MVP when they're giving it to Karl Malone, right? It's like, we can't just give it to him every year. Now, obviously last year, actually it might've been some of his best work, but people were appalled that they went 8-8 or 7-9 or whatever they went. Right. But this year, right, you've got a key decision, right? You've got the Cam Newton out, Mac Jones thing in. So if they end up
Mac Jones,
if they end up being good this year, it's like, hey, Bill had the guts to do it. He pulled the trigger on Mac Jones. And by the way, right, they're going to have a really good defense, right? They're getting a lot of guys back. That defense is going to be outstanding. Who's the defensive guru since, the Giants days of the 80s, Bill Belichick, right? So if he drags, rookie quarterback and a defense, Belichick at it again, right? It's the high-end way to play the Patriots doing high-end things, right? If the Patriots pull off the division, why would you ever bet the Patriots at plus 350 to win the division when you can bet Belichick at, 15, 20 to 1, depending on where you're looking, to win Coach of the Year? Because if they get past the Buffalo Bills to win that division, we're all just going to be going, Bill's done it again. Our old favorite thing, right? Brady versus Belichick.
That's the stuff I love. That's the stuff I love right there. Right. That's
Belichick's going to be back in. Yeah, exactly. Right. So that's first category. Second category, a little bit more serious, a lot more serious, right? What are the major things that you had to deal with, right? Remember in the Colts, there was, the whole cancer situation and Bruce Arians had to take over. And it's like, oh my God, this was such a rough situation, right? This is a little bit different in Minnesota. We talked about the Vikings and liking the concept of them to win the division. Mike Zimmer's 33 to 1 to win Coach of the Year. He's a guy who has never won it, but has always kind of been around it. Everybody in the league respects the job that he's done. Veteran style coach, obviously a lot like Belichick, had a ton of success and hasn't gotten this award. And we've already seen, he's sort of the poster guy here for preseason, just oh my God, this COVID thing is crushing us because his team's half of the team's anti-vax and all of this sort of thing. And he's got to deal with Kirk Cousins and all of this stuff, right? And so if they end up winning the division, it's going to be man, Mike Zimmer, he got the reins of that thing and he pulled it together. Because think about it this way, again, whether it's the Patriots or in this case, the Vikings, who gets credit for when good stuff happens with each team, right? Kansas City does really well. Guess who gets credit? Patrick Mahomes, right? In this case, you're not giving Kirk Cousins any credit. Nobody ever wants to give Kirk Cousins any credit because, frankly, Kirk Cousins rarely deserves any credit. So we're not about to do that. We canceled running backs getting any credit, right? So poor Dalvin Cook's going to sit there, run for 1,500 yards and not get any credit for it. Justin Jefferson couldn't get Rookie of the Year last year, despite an incredible season. In a lot of ways, 14 games of a season once they finally let him on the field. And he didn't get enough credit to oust Justin Herbert. The credit's going to go to Zimmer, right? And at 33 to 1, he is way down the list. And he's way down the list because of group number 3. And group number 3 is the one that usually works out the most here, right? And it's first year coaches. You can go and look at the Coach of the Year award for the last 20 years. There are some hilarious names on there because guys like Matt Nagy came in and for one season, boosted a team all of a sudden, right? Now, was that just small sample size? Is Matt Nagy a great coach? I don't know. So you look at the first year coaches, right? We talked about the Chargers, Brandon Staley right up there, right? So another high end way, right? Problem is he's 14-1 to win coach of the year. And we just talked about they're 6-1 to win the division. So like, that's a little tighter, right? Like that's different than the Vikings at 275 and Zimmer at 33-1. That's like
gotcha.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, I want the way higher side versus like just the slightly higher side. So I think he sort of has to be in the mix there because they're, I think, going to be good. Again, whether they make the wild card or they win the division, whichever. Nick Sirianni with Philadelphia, right? Like, what if they win the division? He's 50-1 because he was having a hard time in his press conference, stringing together a couple of words. And we're all like, this guy's not going to be able to coach. And it's like, well, maybe, like, again, kind of junky division, right? 9-win team maybe wins the division. He's 50-1. We're talking about some long shot stuff here. So I know I just mentioned 4 guys, but 2 of them are pretty big long shots in Zimmer and Sirianni. And then 2 of them are more in the sort of favorite-ish category in Belichick and in Staley, right? So again, the concept really is, okay, I want something on the positive side of the Patriots this year. What am I going to do? Okay, instead of Mac Jones rookie of the year, instead of them to win the division, maybe shoot for Belichick, who again, you could give it to him every single year.
I like that too, because that kind of reminds me of what happens a lot in the NBA, which does happen in other sports where these things become a storyline or a narrative driven type thing. And you can't tell me that after seeing the year Tom Brady had last year, that some writers, some voters wouldn't be, looking for a reason to be like, oh, no,
sure,
we got to give Belichick some love here too. Right. Yeah. And I'm not saying that he wouldn't deserve it. I'm just saying the narrative sometimes comes into play when we're talking about these things.
Yeah.
Let's keep things moving, though, when we talk about the awards. Defensive Player of the Year. A lot of different options. You're going to have your regular names, your Aaron Donalds and things like that. But who else do you see as being, maybe a sleeper or underdog here?
Yeah. So a couple of different things here, right? First and foremost, TJ Watt was my guy last year. He ends up leading the league in sacks, right? He's got the numbers to do it. Doesn't matter. We all understand that Aaron Donald's the best player in the league. And so he gets the Defensive Player of the Year. But so by sort of obligation, I have to bet TJ Watt again, because of course he would win it the year after I bet him. So I'm pretty much committed to TJ Watt for the rest of my life, right? Like I am the fourth Watt brother at this point, right? Like MT Watt, I guess would be the appropriate one there. Defensive Player of the Year. It's interesting, right? Because like I just mentioned, like, okay, if you compare TJ Watt's sack numbers and his general numbers to Aaron Donald, and he still can't beat Aaron Donald, who's won it 3 of the last 4 years. Well, who's the guy who has beat Aaron Donald? It's Stephon Gilmore 2 years ago. Why? Because they play different positions. So you don't get to do, it's not an apples to apples thing. It's an apples to oranges. So if Aaron Donald is the apple, we're looking for some oranges out here that can, like, we can almost trick ourselves into thinking that this player is better because he's got different stat categories, right? Passes defensed and interceptions. And, maybe there's a pick 6 or 2 or something along those lines, right? The other thing with the, Defensive Player of the Year award, you got to kind of be famous already. Like there's no surprise Defensive Player of the Year award. Yeah. Like these guys, it's all going to come from guys that we already know, right? That's why the Myles Garretts of the world are in there. Chase Young, like Chase Young's an interesting one because we know of Chase Young since the Ohio State days, right? But like hasn't been in the league maybe long enough to necessarily fit the bill here. So what I'd be looking for other than TJ Watt as the only guy I think that can definitively have better numbers than Aaron Donald, I'm looking for corners. And so I got a couple in mind, right? I got Tre'Davious White for Buffalo. So one thing, if you're a corner like Stephon Gilmore, you got to be on a good defense, right? You got to be the guy on that defense. So I think if you asked anybody on the street, NFL fan, Buffalo Bills, like name me a defensive player, the first guy they probably say is Tre'Davious White, right? 50-1 shot for our guy, Tre'Davious, right? So like, that's the type of thing where it's like, if he has a big year, you don't have the numbers to compare. So whether it's Trey White, like, you're rolling with what I'm saying here, or whether it's some other corner, if you're looking to fade Aaron Donald outside of being obligated as the fourth Watt brother, I definitely look at somebody on the outside who has different comparative stats, who might be able to trick voters. Not that Stephon Gilmore tricked voters 2 years ago, but might be able to make you believe that Aaron Donald isn't the best defensive player and maybe the best player in the NFL.
That leads me to an interesting segue into the next award, which is Defensive Rookie of the Year. And you're talking about corners, and there's a corner that comes to mind, probably because we're also familiar with his family bloodline, let's say, if we're talking about the same person. So Patrick Surtain II or Junior, that's the one that jumps off the page to me. And maybe it's just from, you happen to catch a little bit of the preseason, and just living up to the hype of getting the high pick. But who are some other defensive rooks that we should be looking at here?
Yeah. And it's funny that you say that, right? Because this year all the new corners are sons of NFL players, right? You got JC Horn, Joe Horn's son. You've got Asante Samuel Jr., right? Obviously Asante Samuel, Pro Bowl cornerback for the Patriots for a long time. All those three guys are interesting options. The problem with Surtain, right? Like you said, it's the first guy that comes to mind for you. Because he had an interception, pick 6 in the preseason, right? Really good defense with the Broncos. They're already looking to trade one of their corners, which is kind of hilarious that they, went out of their way to get another corner when that was probably a strength of their team. Problem is everybody else is kind of on top of that from a market standpoint. And we've seen Surtain, his number move up to like 10-1 at this point, right? And again, you got to have interceptions, right? You have to get your hands on the ball, catch it. You have to take advantage of that. And it's so fun with this Defensive Rookie of the Year thing where it's like, okay, all these guys need opportunity to stand out because it's not, they're not the apex of the league like Aaron Donald. They're just that, there's a subset of guys, like one on every team, basically, who like has to kind of show out a little bit. And this is the one market that I actually care about the preseason in a really meaningful way about, like you said, about Surtain. But again, we need to see something in the preseason, but it also can't be so good that it affects the market that drastically where it changes the number. So there's a couple of guys here. Kwity Paye for the Indianapolis Colts. Now, I just said, don't really feel all that good about the Colts this season. Kwity Paye can have an outstanding defensive season here, get a bunch of sacks, and the Colts can lose a bunch of games, right? Those two things can happen separately. So I love him because he's been absolutely tearing it up in the preseason. Asante Samuel Jr., like if you look at it this way, right? Like, are we positive he and Surtain aren't basically equals when it comes to, talent level, opportunity level, et cetera, et cetera? Surtain's 10-1. Samuel's 25-1, right? This is a simple math problem at that point, right? Where you're like, just give me the 25-1 guy. He's got just as much of a chance to have a pick 6 at some point this season. And by the way, both guys obviously have name brand recognition. So that's really important. So, two different ways to go about it, right? Corner or defensive lineman. Again, both accumulating a bunch of stats. You can see the value proposition there from the corner standpoint. But again, preseason, there are a lot of guys, defensive players, linebackers, linemen who, they get drafted high. And like, I look at that first round and I see all of those defensive linemen get drafted. And I'm like, couldn't really tell you the difference between any of these guys. Right. Yeah. But we look at the preseason, we go, oh, that guy's ready to play. That guy, it's a little bit too quick for him right now. And like, that guy's ready to go big time. And to me, Kwity Paye is the guy who's ready to go big time.
Speaking of going big time, and I'm thinking, when I think big time, we yelled the name a little earlier, Mac Jones, but I kind of knew we were coming back here. And as we go to Offensive Rookie of the Year, there's a lot of big time expectations considering just what happened, but considering the draft position. How much does all that play into a role now when you look at the Offensive Rookie of the Year? Or is this just another way to maybe have some vested interest in the Patriots this season?
Yeah, I did a ton of work on all of these markets last week for the Score, and it's so much fun. So much fun. And so one of the things I did was, Offensive Rookie of the Year, like, does draft position matter? And you go through history and you go, yeah, there's a couple who were number 1 picks, but not that many, right? You can go down the list, right? Andrew Luck, Peyton Manning, John Elway, like 3 of the most sought after, like number 1, like everybody tanked to try to get this guy, quarterbacks who end up having Hall of Fame level careers. Yeah. And none of them won the Rookie of the Year. Right. And, there's a bunch of others. Your boy Jamarcus goes number 1. He never won Rookie of the Year. So, no, obviously a couple of them did, but a lot of them don't. So it doesn't mean just because we've all been looking for Trevor Lawrence for 2 years now, maybe even a little bit longer, it doesn't mean that he's just guaranteed to win Offensive Rookie of the Year. And so the fun thing about the Mac Jones news, right, is that it flips the market. And he goes from like 10-1 to like plus 450. Obviously, way too late to bet that now, right? That's something that you would have wanted got on top of before. But it's just like some of these others, right? The Aaron Donald thing that we talked about. You're going to have a bunch of quarterbacks. They're all going to put up stats. Maybe one team's going to make the playoffs, and we're going to kind of point and like, okay, that's the guy. But who's the guy who's going to do something different? Who's the other guy who's going to linger? And the best part about Mac Jones moving up in that marketplace is everybody else had to take a tick down. And so we got Kyle Pitts right now at 12-1 in the market. There's a reason. Think about it. You're the Falcons, right? And you're going, okay, we're going to go one more year here with Matt Ryan. We're not going to take a quarterback with the number 4 pick. The first 3 picks were all quarterbacks, which means we have every other human being in college football to pick from, right? At every position. And our defense is atrocious, right? But what do? We pick a tight end who is frankly just a tight end in name only, right? I don't think we're going to get a ton of like setting the edge run blocks from Kyle Pitts this year, but we've seen him basically one play in the preseason. And it was just like his speed off the charts, like right off, popping off the screen type of a thing. This is a guy who I think goes for 1,000 yards. I think he gets like 10 touchdowns this year because he's going to get targeted constantly by Matt Ryan. As Matt Ryan, who's just, by the way, Matt Ryan could probably see an exit sign here coming here, whether it's from Atlanta or from his career in general. No more Julio Jones, right? You obviously have Calvin Ridley. He's going to take a lot of the attention, especially early on in the season. I think Kyle Pitts puts up some big numbers. So what if none of these other guys in the quarterback category, what if none of them make the playoffs? Right? Then it's just a stat category type situation, right? If Jimmy G hangs onto the gig, so Trey Lance isn't necessarily doing what we think Trey Lance might do. He's not a bad bet, by the way, as kind of the lowest on that totem pole because of, time constraints. Zach Wilson, right? The Jets aren't going to make the playoffs. Jacksonville, right? Unless our 10-1 or 11-1 comes through here with them winning the division, they're not going to make the playoffs. What if the Patriots doesn't work out for them, right? Obviously tough division there. They don't make the playoffs, et cetera, et cetera. Same thing with the Bears, right? Got to include them with Justin Fields. Now it's just a stat category situation, right? And who's going to put up stats? I think Kyle Pitts puts up a ton of stats this year. And they go, you know what? It's about time, right? Look at all the tight ends who want to get paid like receivers, right? So the media, I think in this case, is, these are the people who vote it, right? They're gonna be like, it's time to give tight ends their due. Right? We're not Travis Kelce's never going to win the MVP. What we can do is we can throw Kyle Pitts, a rookie of the year vote here. Tight end has never won rookie of the year. I think this year is a very good chance, especially better than 12-1 odds to be the rookie of the year.
Interesting stuff for sure. And lots of different angles to go. And as we close out the award section of this, we talk about MVP.
Yeah.
Is there a lot of different ways we can go with the MVP? Or is it one of those things where it's like, you know what? It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, we do. I mean, listen, if the last 30 minutes of this podcast has taught you anything, it's like we tend to overthink some things sometimes.
Hey, that's why we're here. That's why we're here.
Yeah, exactly. In this case, I think we overthink. And listen, people aren't going to necessarily love this, but sometimes we just overthink the idea that like Patrick Mahomes is just the best player. He is the poster boy. It's not like he's won it 3 years in a row and we're all bored with him having done so. We're not going to get a Lamar Jackson type of year where it's like, oh my God, this guy just sort of took over and blah, 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 blah. I think Patrick Mahomes is going to win the MVP this year. Obviously, the market agrees with me. He is the favorite. But how I would play this is I'm going to wait a few weeks. Think about it last year, right? I was all about Russell Wilson winning the MVP before the season started, and I was crowing throughout the first 6 to 8 weeks, right? The number, 10-1 gets all the way down to like even money. He's the MVP. Like, why are we even bother playing the rest of the season for this? Just hand him the trophy, and then we'll figure out the rest of the stuff later. Didn't work out. Why? Sample size, right? We have 4, 5, 10 games. Somebody's going to have a really great, start of the season. Maybe it's Christian McCaffrey. Maybe it's something like that. Somebody else to draw everybody's attention away from Patrick Mahomes. But once the season spreads out a little bit and we play our now 17 game season, and again, how do we have a couple of bets on the Chiefs not winning the division? Of course we do. But again, how do we play the Chiefs? I don't want to lay minus 300 on their division. I don't want to play them to win the Super Bowl at the current prices. I don't even want to play Patrick Mahomes to win the MVP at current prices. But 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks in, we might have some other candidates who get all the attention. And it doesn't mean that they're going guaranteed to win. So we're going to wait. We're going to lie in the weeds here a little bit. And then we're going to finally sort of shoot our shot here with Patrick Mahomes, week 5, week 6, something like that. Once everybody gets a little sour on him and we end up getting like a 5-1 type of a deal, then we'll swoop in and get down on Patrick Mahomes to win the MVP, watch him do great things. They'll finish 14-3 and everybody like, yeah, of course, Patrick Mahomes, second MVP of his career. Like, what else would we be doing here? He's not going, his odds aren't going to improve in the first couple of weeks, right? Somebody else is going to pop up. We're going to fade that sort of hysteria over whoever that might be. And we're going to grab Patrick Mahomes. We're going to be a little patient when it comes to that.
I like it. One other thing that I do enjoy a lot are season-long prop futures. And there's 3 different ones that we really like here. Do you want to kind of speed through these a little here? Yeah. So if we go passing leader, let's start there. Who jumps out at you the most in terms from a value prospect?
Passing leader, what do we need, right? We need guys who throw the ball a ton. Do coaches want to throw the ball a ton? No, not necessarily, right? You need guys who are throwing it from first quarter to fourth quarter. So look at teams who have bad defenses, right? Mm-hmm. You got to throw your way out of this, right? The Matt Ryans of the world. He's somehow always around 5,000 yards, not necessarily because he wants to be, but because he has to be, right? The market, a little buy low here, right? People a little dicey on Joe Burrow. Had a little struggles in the preseason, coming back from the knee injury, et cetera, et cetera. Who could blame him? But guess what? That defense is going to be atrocious. There is no reason to bench Joe Burrow, right? He is the future. So basically, we're looking at 17 games, 4 quarters of just Joe Burrow throwing the ball a ton, right? So he had a couple of games last year, Baltimore and Pittsburgh, where his numbers were really low. Why? Those teams are really good. But everybody else he played, it was like 300 yards here, 300 yards there, right? So again, the market a little low on him right now because of, there's some of the shakiness here. But just from a volume standpoint, a lot of these really good teams, Patrick Mahomes, for example, might not play the last game of the season. Same thing with Tom Brady. Give me a Joe Burrow type, right? And any team that has a quarterback who's going to have to throw the ball a ton all 4 quarters because his defense isn't very good, jump on that guy. The one exception is Josh Allen. The Buffalo Bills just might throw the ball every play this year, and he might be able to get it to 3 quarters.
Fair enough. So if that's a mentality for the passing leader, what about the rushing title? What's the mentality like there?
Well, it's like fantasy football, right? I don't really care who the guy is. They're all kind of the same, right? So, fast, big, bulking, athletic guys. Just, is he going to get 200, 300 carries, et cetera, et cetera? We know Derrick Henry is going to. I don't want to bet against Derrick Henry. I don't want to bet on Derrick Henry getting hurt because the only way Derrick Henry doesn't win the rushing title is if he gets significantly hurt. He missed a game last year, still won it by 400 yards, right? Yeah. So you can see some of the marketplace having him up at plus 400. I don't want to say that's free money, but if I told you literally in any of these other conversations that there was a really, really strong likelihood of a plus 400, bet winning, you jump all over that. Couple of long shot guys, Gus Edwards. We saw another running back get hurt in Baltimore. Hopefully it's not contagious. Baltimore. Justice Hill goes down, right? And of course you don't have Mark Ingram around anymore. And so Gus Edwards is just sitting there on his own. J.K. Dobbins obviously out for the year. He's just sitting there. He's like, I'm the only guy left in the running back room here. That's what we want to do here in Baltimore. This guy might accidentally get himself 300 carries and 1,500 yards here. Yeah. And so again, if Derrick Henry has to miss 3, 4, 5 games and it opens it up to somebody else, I want a really long shot. I don't want the McCaffrey at 8-1 or the Ezekiel Elliott. I don't want any of that. I want somebody real long shot. So Gus Edwards and Damian Harris, also another name there for the Patriots, who could get a ton of carries this season.
One last player prop I want to look at is receiving yards.
Yeah, this one's kind of crazy. I got deep into the weeds from an analytics standpoint, right? What do you want? You want a guy targeted a lot? Right? You want a guy who is targeted down the field a lot, right? And maybe they didn't necessarily connect a ton or as much as they should have last year, but at least he's getting looks deep down the field. And I had some really interesting results. A couple of them were some of the really obvious ones, but for 2 different reasons. Tyreek Hill and Devontae Adams, right? Devontae Adams, all the targets in the world, right? But he's getting a lot of yards after the catch type stuff. Tyreek Hill, a ton of ADOT, right? Average distance of target, air yards, right? Stuff deep down the field. Not as many targets, not as many receptions, but when he gets them, they're really big, right? So he ends up, 14 yards per reception. If he gets one more per game at that rate, right, he can catch Stephon Diggs, who was the leader last year. By the way, this market is chaos every year, right? Stephon Diggs was 20-1 last year. Like, nobody bet on Stephon Diggs. New team. He's in Buffalo. We don't know about Josh Allen at that point. It's like all of a sudden Stephon Diggs wins. Is he going to replicate that season? Maybe, but I would bet that it's maybe a little bit lower and that somebody else pops up. And so a guy like Hill, a guy like Adams are two of these sort of, second tier type guys that I would look to bet on. And in my research and all of this, a weird name popped up. A guy who, I sort of set parameters for all three of those categories. Robbie Anderson for Carolina. Okay. He ended up, being just over the threshold for those three categories: air yards, ADOT, and targets in the period of time that I was looking at. And he's 50-1, and he's played with Sam Darnold with the Jets. They're going to have attention on different wide receivers there in Carolina, with DJ Moore being kind of the number one guy with Carolina. Obviously, Christian McCaffrey's back, so you're looking in the backfield a ton. You might get beat deep a bunch by Robbie Anderson, and he has that sort of connection that they showed in the preseason with Sam Darnold. So that was kind of an off the board one that I wasn't really expecting, but it makes a ton of sense that those guys might connect a lot more than maybe you think. And at 50-1, that's worth a couple of bucks, isn't it?
Sure, why not? Who doesn't like a little sprinkle on 50-1 action, right? But action starts Thursday night, the opener of the NFL season, Cowboys-Bucs. I can't wait for this game. It seems like at one point in the summer, it's like, oh, is football ever going to start? And then now it's finally here. And it's like, okay, come on. So, of course, we got to be laying down something on this first game here. Right? But what are you looking at here with this game, Cowboys versus Bucs, to open up the season?
Yeah. And that's the thing too, right? You talk about all summer long. All these week one numbers have been up all summer long, right? And we've seen them fluctuate up, down. And, it was not just because it's the opening night game, but because we've had a bit of a roller coaster ride here with the Dak Prescott injury stuff. Yeah. This number was 6. Early on, 6.5 when it opened back in May. And of course, we have this wild ride, and it's like, okay, who's going to be able to play? And is Dak going to be up? And it goes up to 9, and it's settled back down to 8 here. So I don't love anything when it comes to the spread here, right? I can't bet Tampa Bay knowing that there was a 6.5 out earlier this summer. That made a ton of sense for people to bet, right? They're the defending Super Bowl champions. And so, of course, that number got to 7, goes through 7. To me, that's a little bit much, right? Going all the way up to 8 or even potentially 8.5 here. Here's what I would do, right? I think Tampa Bay wins this game. Do they do so relatively comfortably? I don't really want to be like backdoored here by the Cowboys. I'm going to use this as a tease piece. This has 6-point teaser written all over it. Let's get this number down to 2 and start just sprinkling away on a couple of different spots over the, Sunday. There's a bunch of 2.5-point underdogs. You could tease up to 8.5. There's a couple of -6, 6.5. So you could tease down. Listen, do it correctly mathematically, and if you need to know how to do that, feel free to ask me. But there's a bunch of different ways, bunch of different options on Sunday to tease this with. I'd get it started with a little Tampa Bay -2 teaser leg and just start comboing it with a bunch of different plays for Sunday.
I like it. I like it a lot, actually, but it makes me also wonder, we're confident in the Bucs winning, but does that make it a survivor play maybe?
Oh, do you really want to go out on the opening Thursday if something crazy happens? Right? Just that reason. Just for that reason, just don't bother, don't just stay away. Again, we talk Chargers, right? High ceiling, low floor, all of these different teams. Who's more high ceiling and low floor than the Cowboys, right? Would you be stunned if the offense was just absolutely clicking and, a couple of plays go their way? The defense is rejuvenated because they made a bunch of changes on the defensive side, bunch of different players, new coordinator, all of that sort of thing. Maybe that gets a lot better. Listen, this time last year, you and I were talking about the Dallas Cowboys being a potential Super Bowl, quote unquote, dark horse. I don't even know if they were that, dark of a horse. And I'm looking at this going it was a disaster of a year last year. They might be okay. I don't love your boy Mike McCarthy, but they might be okay. And I don't really want to walk into that on a Thursday night and be like, yeah, Survivor's over because, Tommy and the guys, he threw a couple of picks and, Dak Prescott looked amazing and that sort of thing, right? There's worse teams that I'll be looking to fade on Sunday from a Survivor standpoint.
Matt, honestly, man, I can't believe the NFL season is finally here. I want to thank you so much for joining me on this debut episode of the DRF Sports Betting Podcast. Just because, first off, if there's someone I needed to call, someone that I was going to call to come join me on this first episode, it was going to be you. So I really appreciate you making the time and stick around a little bit, like off the air, so I can like beg you to come back on again. But in the meantime, where can the people follow you on Twitter, man?
Yeah, man, at @MRussAuthentic on Twitter for everything that I do over there. A lot of celebrating and commiserating all of these plays, right? We got to celebrate them when we win. We got to commiserate a little bit when we lose. It happens. We do lose. Even the best, right? Only win 55% of the time. So that 45% of the time, we're going to have a lot of fun commiserating, complaining about some of these teams and these coaches, especially in the primetime games. How much fun is that? Can't wait to get this thing fired up. And as always, man, like, you know, anytime you ask me to do anything, I'm there for you, brother. You're the best. And this is a really exciting project.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Talk to you soon. Thanks to Matt Russell of The Score for joining me, and hopefully he'll be able to join us again in the coming weeks. But until then, don't forget to catch the NFL divisional previews up right now at drf.com/sports. Also, don't forget to follow us on the social media feeds because we want to hear from you. Let us know what you think of the pod, whether you agree with our picks, you disagree with our picks, or maybe the picks made you some money. Either way, we want to know what you think. So let us know. Follow the page on Instagram at DRF Sports and on Twitter at DRF_sports. But here's the plan. Don't forget, you can catch this, the DRF Sports Betting Podcast, dropping every Tuesday and Friday. So make sure you're ready for that and like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, you can follow me on Twitter at Sheldon Alexander or on Instagram at Sheldon Alexander. And until next time, see ya.
Thanks for listening to the DRF Sports Betting Podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show. For more sports betting advice, go to drf.com/sports and follow on Twitter at DRF_sports.